Hi, it's Drafthouse Diary for Monday, September 4th, 2023, the last day of a busy holiday weekend. So I decided to come out here midday to the Alamo Drafthouse at Littleton's Aspen Grove to see Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem. And I'm going to do things in a slightly different order than usual today. I am going to talk first about the Alamo pre-show for this movie because I think it captures something that's interesting to me about the development of this property, this franchise. They started with this comic by Eastman and Laird, which was a very strange and subversive indie comic, toying with so much of the idea of superheroes and indie comics and so much else. And then it just exploded into this property that was aimed squarely at preteen kids, mostly preteen boys. It became something that was still funny and irreverent, but in a more childish way, and maintained in its own way some of that weird sense of humor and that subversion of the original comics. But that TV show was just scratching the surface of what this became. It exploded into mainly a toy property, as well as comics aimed at all different ages, and more movies and more TV shows and live music tours. And the Alamo pre-show really drove that home, because there might have been one or two trailers for movies that involved mutant creatures. There was a trailer for The Fly, for example. Most of the pre-show was clips of PSAs and TV promos and toy commercials from the heyday of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Playmates came out with so many toys of so many different weird types, and it must have just been a money printing machine for so long. But it was so squarely aimed at that 7 to 9 year old or 7 to 10 year old age range that it's easy to lose sight of the weirdness from which this began as an indie comic. And this brings me to talking about the movie itself, because during that pre-show, I saw a lot of families coming in. Mostly it was a dad, a bit younger than me, with kids, usually boys, in that 6 to 9 year old age range. And I kind of expect that this was because these dads remembered that this was right in their wheelhouse when they were watching the TV show and they were playing with these toys. When they were that age, they figured, great, a new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles thing for my little kids. And I hope these parents did not regret that, because this movie was its own thing. It wasn't purely a return to the Eastman and Laird comics, although it was closer to that than it was a return to the syndicated TV show that kicked off the global phenomenon that it became. It had the right sense of humor, the right degree of subversion, but it was focused on commenting on current media. Lots of jokes about the Avengers and jokes about pop music. I think it really did a good job of bringing the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles into the present day in terms of all of its references, in terms of what it chose to parody or comment on or satirize. And most of it wasn't parody or satire. It was straight up commentary by the characters who were steeped in pop culture. And yet it found its own sense of humor. So I liked the story, I liked the characterizations, and I think what was super important about this is that the characters were teenagers, and they felt like teenagers, at least to the extent that an old man like me can gather that they felt like teenagers. To me, they did. The fact that April O'Neil was also a teenager helped make that work. In the original versions, and especially the cartoon version of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, where you've got these teenage turtles, these teenagers who have teenage sensibilities, teenage experience and understanding, and they're teaming up with this professional adult TV news reporter. That never seemed to make sense to me. There always seemed to be more of a disconnect, and there'd be a bigger culture gap between these people than the stories really acknowledged. Whereas here, having April O'Neil to be a student journalist, a teenager who's living the kind of life that they wistfully wish they could, being high schoolers, the way they could never be, but the way they see in movies, that worked so very well in this movie. The movie wasn't perfect. For the most part, the action scenes were blocked really well and designed really well, but there were a couple of exceptions there. In terms of those dads who were bringing their preteen kids into this, some of it was not a problem. Some of the humor just might have gone over their heads. That's fine. But there was also some legit nightmare fuel in this movie, especially in the last third or so. And, you know, I don't know that I would want to be the dad of an 8-year-old that I took to see this movie. Maybe I'm being overly cautious here, but I wonder about that. But that is not a criticism of the movie. I think that it was targeting a different audience, just like the original comics targeted a different audience from the syndicated cartoon, which was also targeting a different audience than some of the later direct-to-video things. This is an idea that has a lot of breadth to it, and this movie found another way, another approach, another set of interesting things that it could draw from this material. I do want to comment about the visual style of this movie. It reminded me somewhat of the Spider-Verse movies. Not that I'm saying at all it was derivative of the Spider-Verse movies, but I think that Spider-Verse and this Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie, they're showing us what might be the beginning, might be the high point of a new kind of visual style with animation, something that isn't trying to be smooth, isn't trying to be overly consistent. Instead, it's using the power of animation to add a certain kind of energy that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do with live action if you didn't have a lot of post-processing. There was no such thing as a purely straight line, no such thing as a level surface, no such thing as a perfect circle. Everything was janky and sketchy. It was like the world was made of a gesture drawing. And that worked very well. It conveyed a sense of uncertainty. It made that every single shot, even shots in which there was next to no motion, had an energy and a kinetic sense to it. So I really liked this visual style for this movie, and I don't want to see this replicated. I want to see more experiments like this, like Spider-Verse, people doing more interesting things with a visual style of animation, and I think there's a lot of potential for more of that. If this movie is derivative, it's derivative of a little bit derivative of Avengers, but at least it acknowledges that, so maybe it's more of a commentary. I do think that it was derivative of the first X-Men movie. It definitely owes something to Akira in that last act of the movie, which is where some of that nightmare fuel comes from, of course. Those are not really criticisms. Movies build on other movies all the time, but it was interesting to see those as the points that the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie chooses to draw from. Made for some interesting animation, interesting storytelling. Other parts of this trip to the Alamo, I don't have a lot to say about the food. I just got some coffee and popcorn. They were good. The coffee was hot because they had to brew it fresh. And the staff, very friendly. It was a moderately full auditorium, one of the smaller auditoriums. It looks like they've already relegated this Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie to daytime shows only. Maybe because most of what they're seeing are kids being brought to this movie. But the overall show was good, a nice visit to the Alamo, and a movie I'm glad that I saw. Thank you very much for joining me on this fine day. If you're interested in my take on Across the Spider-Verse, I've got 2 different reviews of that for 2 different viewings, and you can see those here. I'll be back with more Drafthouse Diaries soon. In the meantime, enjoy your movies, and when you do, stay till the end of the credits.